Hey everyone, welcome back to Inventing Construction. I'm Ross Griffin, and today we have a very special guest, someone I've spoken to before actually, Paul Hemming. Is that correct, Paul?
That's right, yeah.
Excellent. But Paul, before you introduce yourself, let me introduce the topic and subtopics of the day. So we're going to chat about C-Link and the changing face of quantity surveying. Paul being the QS, this will be super interesting. Paul's going to explain what is C-Link and own the build. We're going to ask Paul about how he's seen the adoption of digital over the last number of years. And this is an interesting one, double trouble, I call it. SMEs and subcontractors. How are we seeing upskilling of SMEs and subcontractors in order to facilitate digital information upstream to main contractors and eventually the client? And then what advice can Paul give to SMEs and subcontractors that are looking to digitize or develop their digital skills? But let's not waste any more time, Paul. You introduce yourself, please, to the
Thank
listeners.
you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you again. So, Paul Hemming, quantity surveyor by experience, did about 10, 12 years, always as a subcontract quantity surveyor. So subcontracting very close to my heart.
Yeah.
So I worked first for a small family-run business in the Midlands, where I'm from, and then moved down to London about 15 years ago now, and worked on large skyscrapers, the walkie-talkie, the Shard, Battersea Power Station. And then 10 years ago, left day-to-day construction or projects, if that makes sense, to set up a software company called C-Link to kind of solve construction procurement. So QS turned tech person.
Entrepreneur.
If you want to call it that,
Philanthropist.
you can. Philanthropist, I'm not sure about, but I'll take it.
Yeah. 10 years already. Geez, time is flying, isn't it?
Yeah. So we, business was founded in September 2015 and first launched in June 2016.
Okay, excellent. Can we get into a little bit on C-Link then? Exactly what is C-Link? I hear you on your podcast talking about it and the promotion, of course, online, but can we dig a little bit into that?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I guess if we start with the problem as we perceived it, so C-Link was founded by myself, subcontract QS, and Chris Barber, who has experience as both a subcontractor and a main contractor.
Okay.
And we don't necessarily think that everyone talks about construction kind of being broken, right?
Yeah.
Our perception is that it isn't broken, it can just be done better, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, you work on projects like the Shard, 20 Fenchurch Street, those projects get built, those projects are amazing, right? But could it be better? And when we talk about the problem with procurement, supply chain management, etc., we look at the existing way as kind of like a long and winding path, right? So if you want to procure a subcontract package, for instance, you're probably using a tech stack that definitely includes Excel. You're not getting away from that.
Go Excel.
Yeah, Word, I don't know, SharePoint, OneDrive, PDFs, it's going on email, it's coming back, right? And that's as you issue out your tender, you receive your quote, you do your tender addendum, you do your meetings, you do X, Y, and Z, you then issue a contract. So all of those steps are all on a completely fragmented tech stack, which screws you over when you then have an audit trail problem, like there's a dispute. What happened? What was said at stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? So there's nothing there. Data, you're not capturing any data. And this goes from an SME all the way to tier ones.
Yeah.
Tier ones will have all of their tender analysis on one QS's
hard
Excel,
drive
on their hard drive. He or she leaves all that.
It's crazy.
It just disappears, right? And we speak to all these tier ones, say, show us your data, and some of them will puff out their chest and say, I'll show you the data, and they will have just single line item saying £13 million subcontract without any of the data behind it. So anyway, all of those different points, so you're talking about improving the data, improving the audit trail, and then saving a QS time, because about a third of a QS's time is spent on manual unproductive tasks, right? So going, where was that in that Excel spreadsheet? Copy paste. QSs in the UK, since I started my career back in 2007, there's always been 5,000 to 10,000 vacancies for QSs, which is great if you're a QS because supply and demand means you get a pretty good salary, right?
Exactly.
But if you're a main contractor, subcontractor client, and you're paying for a QS at silly money, in my opinion.
And
sorry,
yeah, you're right, and it's getting worse.
It's getting worse, right?
It's unbelievable.
And a third of their time is spent going copy paste, copy paste, copy paste.
Yeah.
So wrap all of that up. I realise I'm rattling on a little bit, but if you have poor audit trail, poor data, and a lack of QSs, and you're spending a fortune on them, what we saw as an opportunity was to create a space where you don't have that long and winding path. You have everything all in one single space. You capture the data, you capture the audit trail, and you save your QSs a third of their time. We actually think that you can save up to 47% of pre-construction activity.
So C-Link facilitates the tendering process, downstream analysis, communication, all of that aspect of that, finding your subcontractor or main contractor, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's to be honest with you, we're kind of procurement agnostic, right? So you could be a client procuring a main contractor, you could be a main contractor procuring a consultant, you could be a subcontractor procuring a subcontractor. You can do whatever you want, right? And the principle is simple, that one, you have your supply chain in a single space, all the pre-qual data in a single space, as opposed to on an Excel document or in someone's head. And then you have all of your tender documents, all your contract documents in one space, and the automation from there. So it's basically cradle to grave, your supply chain to a contract placed digitally with a DocuSign on it.
I actually started my career as an estimator.
So, you lucky devil. Should we be talking?
Yeah, I'm telling you, right? So the generation of tender packages, and back in the day, what we were doing were photocopying drawings, folding drawings, printing out your parts, your BOQ, or photocopying your BOQ, going these items only, and not these items. I was thinking about when you were talking there, have we actually really improved the process when you have to go, you're going from desktop to Excel to email to, it could be SMS, it could be phone calls.
Yeah, exactly.
Your communication trail is as bad as it was when we were sending out posts, or even worse, Fax machine was a revelation, I think, at least you had the communication back and forth.
But even if you think about, one of the things that gets used a lot is WeTransfer, or Dropbox or OneDrive or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then a WeTransfer link expires, a Dropbox folder, if I'm the subby and you're a unscrupulous main contractor and we're having a dispute about whether or not a drawing was in a folder or not, you can just go and pop it in there, can't you? And say it was always in there. WeTransfer link expires. So you just need a digital footprint for everything.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. If you have so many points of contact in a digital workflow, surely there's a better, more efficient way of working, and maybe question yourself about that. I think it's excellent. So 10 years with C-Link now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your birthday was last year, was it? Is that it? 2015 or this year?
Testing my memory here. The formation of the business was the 23rd of September 2015, and the official launch date would have been, I think, the 1st of June 2016. So we're in our 10th year of kind of trading.
Wonderful.
And it's amazing where the time goes. Yeah, thanks.
And tell me, let's move on then. So to Own the Build. What was the motivation around starting the Own the Build podcast?
Yeah, so as we were chatting off air, it wasn't actually my idea. It was the idea of our head of marketing. And I have to say, I was a little bit unsure whether it was going to work as a format. What I would say is, when we started the business going back to 2015-16, and we're talking about that it felt to me like nobody was producing construction content. There's more and more now, but that's kind of really accelerated in the last 3 or 4 years. And so when I was a trainee QS, I came straight from school as a trainee QS. I remember just being kind of sat in the office and people saying, "Oh yeah, so the cantilever scaffold, blah blah blah," or the birdcage scaffold. I remember thinking, "What the hell is a birdcage scaffold?" Right?
Yeah.
I remember
what pigeons? Where are the pigeons?
Exactly. Right. I had this glossary of my own terms, so I could not feel like a muppet.
Yeah.
In that context, what we started doing in 2015-16 was producing like templates, blog, newsletter, nothing revolutionary, right? But we kind of captured a bit of attention because nobody else was really doing it.
Yeah.
So we had a big subscriber newsletter following, and like in the first 4 or 5 years of business, and then in deep dark lockdown, my head of marketing said to me, "Let's convert that written form into a podcast." Yeah. And so the idea of the podcast is, and we're 200 episodes in, is once a week I do what you're doing today, sit down with someone. It's typically commercial, contractual, future, quantity surveying, etc. All QS topics. And the idea really being that our listeners kind of come away from that with like one of two things. One being, oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Educational piece.
Yeah. Or two, oh my God, I didn't think I could do that with a final account statement or PC or, something actually really tactical and actionable. And I'm forever amazed that people listen to QSs rattling on, but here we are.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah. QSs listen to QSs.
Exactly. There's plenty of us.
Absolutely. But I think there's something very interesting about that is I also had the same reflection when I started. You come out of university and you think, okay, I've learned all this stuff, and then you start in the business and suddenly you realize,
what's a birdcage scaffold?
Yeah, and maybe I'm not equipped from the university experience to be put into the real life, and you have a whole huge learning curve to happen, and you'd know where to, back in the day, you'd know where to go for this, only back into
it's almost
textbooks.
A bit embarrassing, right, to say. It's almost, I don't know if it's like that, the culture of a construction company. If you say, sorry, Dave, what's a birdcage scaffold? It's kind of like putting your hand up in class, isn't it? But even worse in
head
some
above
ways.
the parapet.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
you're just going to
get that. Yeah.
So absolutely.
But it's and it's difficult. So this type of format, I think, is really good for young QSs coming out. They can listen to stuff and upskill a little better. But you were telling me earlier on the build 200 and something. 200
As we record this, we're on episode 204 or something.
Yeah, awesome.
Like that. So, it's going really well.
Yeah, excellent. And so the key topics really you guys are trying to address is all around quantity surveying, the commercial aspect, contracts, full supply chain. So from consultants to main contractors, clients, developer, QSs, right down to...
anything you could procure will help you do it. Like it's kind of that, we're procurement agnostic, right?
Yeah.
There's certain things that you have to do with procurement irrespective of what you're doing, right? There's a tender document, tender addendum, quote receipt, contracts. Whatever those documents are, we'll automate them for you. You crack on. So but you still have the capture the data, capture the audit trail. So that's how it works.
And over the last 10 years then, how have you seen the adoption of digital or digitization change? Has it been dramatic?
Dramatic, I'm not quite sure I'd use that language. Definitely there has been an evolution in the thinking of the industry, I would say. I mean, back in 2015 to 2020, you would talk to people about, if you said the phrase digital maturity, people would laugh at you and say, what on earth are you talking about? And if you say that now, everyone's like, yeah, we're really into digital maturity, right? So there's definitely, it's a bit of a buzz now, isn't it? And I think that in the context of the marketplace as it is today, margins are as bad as they've ever been, right?
It's crazy.
Companies are now actually starting to assess how are we spending all this money. If you just look at it as a QS, right? You said you're paying 100 grand for QS, and like I said, 35 grand of that is on unproductive time. So you're kind of looking at it thinking, what can we do differently? Or, we have a conversation with one of our clients who's started working with us in the last year, and they say, we lost 120 grand on this non-recoverable item because we didn't have a scope of works library. We want to have a scope. So I think people are starting to rationalize that change can be a good thing. Do we think that construction companies are absolutely amazing at implementing change? It's our construction software providers amazing at helping them with that. I think we're all collectively getting better. And so the long answer to that would be, back in 2015, I don't think we had the maturity as a collective in software or in the psyche, but it's getting better.
Now, the narrative has changed quite a bit over the last number of years. I remember we were in Ireland in 2020, end of 2019, actually. It was a BIM conference there, and we were looking and here and listening to the presenters and so on, and chatting to people, and we felt, wow, we haven't really kicked on here yet. But in the last 4 years, 5 years, the narrative has changed completely, I would say. The people really are, the terminology has changed, the quality of conversation has changed, and I feel that it's across Europe, actually. It's really kicking in now.
I'd agree. And whether people like it or not, COVID had a massive impact. And it, even for software companies, right, you're a startup, it's not easy to start with. And if I think pre-COVID, a couple of meetings kind of stick out in my head where you'd get through to someone and say, do you want to have a meeting? This is what we do, blah, blah, blah. And they say, yeah, come in and do a demo. And so you would have to go and do a demo with them, right? And a couple of times, you'd travel 3 hours, and they'd call you 20 minutes before and say, can't do it, sorry, see you later. And it would be painstaking, right?
Absolutely.
Even just the flip to Teams, Google Meet, whatever.
Yeah,
it's completely revolutionized like how we go about doing our business, right? So that's definitely had a big impact. I think working from home, and if you think about audit trail, right?
Yeah.
That person, that QS working from home, you want to see what they're doing, I think. And so you want some tools to do that. And if you've got Word, Excel, email, because how do you say at the moment to your QS, can you update me with where you are? They'll say, I'll do it at the end of the week. I'll update my procurement schedule. I'll show you it on Monday. Like
can
a week passes.
Can I see it live, you know?
You can't. And even if they show it to you live, 1 hour later,
it's changed.
Yeah, so I think there's, because of that flexible working, remote working, because of Teams and Google Meet, things have, the psyche has changed. People before would just say,
on a mass scale, it is shifted a level, right?
Yeah, because even that older generation who would be, you'd probably describe them as laggards, whether or not they'd like to hear it, will now happily go on a Google Meet with you before, whereas 10 years ago, they'd have said, come and see me or I'm not going to speak to you.
I remember that first lockdown, actually. We were kind of in our infancy. We were a year old and we were doing lots of cold calling and cold messaging and so on. And can we meet for a coffee? And that first lockdown was, can we meet for a Teams meeting? No, we should meet for a coffee. Wait till the lockdown's over and this thing is gone and we can meet. And the months tick by. And I remember by the second lockdown, people were going, let's meet on Teams. Now people are much more comfortable with it on a mass scale, if you like, you know. And the amount of wasted time that you got back, again, as you explained, traveling your 3 hours for that demo, hour for that coffee for 45 minutes to come back another hour, and you're kind of going, totally inefficient, really, you know. Tell me, what are the challenges kind of professionals are facing during that digital transition? In your experience, if you talk about SMEs and contractors that you guys service? Yeah,
I mean, so we work right across the supply chain from the smallest companies all the way through to tier ones, right? But 95%, 99%, I forget the exact number of construction is SMEs, right? So even some of our bigger clients would still be classed as an SME. Yeah. And they might have 100 staff or whatever. Yeah. For me, I think that there is still quite a lack of understanding as to what the problem is that a company is trying to solve, right? Yeah. And often it's a bit like a QS procuring an architect is a bit more difficult than a QS procuring a subcontractor, right? Yeah. I always procure a subcontractor. I know what I need to do. I procure an architect. They're kind of, they've got their own status. I'm not 100% sure what to do because they're a consultant and I don't fully understand it. It's like a different dynamic. Yeah. And I often think that the procurement of a software provider is kind of similar to that consultant in that you don't quite know how to do it because it's an abnormal. Yeah. And therefore, you don't quite get it right. Yeah. And therefore, it fails. Yeah. And therefore, people think, software is rubbish. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I've had loads of bad experiences with software. But the reality is, what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? And quite often, it doesn't matter. The software can be the best bit of software on the planet. If you don't know why you're doing it, it's going to fail. And if you don't have a policy for it, and it sounds boring, right? Yeah, yeah. Set a policy. But if I simplify it to just like one working example, which is construction company we know had a load of disputes, had some claims against them, didn't have signed contracts, right? And they had unsigned contracts with contractors and it caused a load of problems. So that company sets a policy, which is from now on, you cannot send out a contract unless it's sent out digitally on C-Link, unless it's sent out with a DocuSign on C-Link and approved via C-Link. Yeah. That's the policy, right? Our software can do that for them. So if you say, this is what we're now doing, and you say to your 100 QSs, we're doing this, and they say why, and you explain to them why, that's really obvious, isn't it? Okay, we'll do that. That makes sense. And then I won't have a claim against me. I won't look like a fool. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're going to do it. Mr. Software Provider, can you do that for me? Yes. As opposed to what can happen will be, because you're in the unknown, because you're a bit uneducated on the procurement of that service, what could happen is you say, I've got this amazing software, QSs, use this software, it's going to change your life. 10 of them will be like, okay, great. Another 90 will be like, what are we doing? I've got enough going on in my life. I don't want to do this.
Exactly,
What's the end point? So
the storytelling almost, is it?
It's on us as providers to tell the story, articulate why it needs to be different, how it can be better, but also like we will kind of almost insist, like through the process of customer success and through the sales process, what are you trying to solve? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to change your policy? So, you want a digital contract? This is your new policy. You need to articulate it, and then we'll run it out for you. So I think that it's difficult, and you have to be sure why you're doing it, because software won't solve your problems unless you know what they are, and you say, this is why we're doing it.
I think we often come across it. It's the biggest mistake. People spend tens and thousands of pounds on a new software thinking it's going to solve all these problems they perceive they have, but what they don't look at is the process. What process, first of all, have you? Are you trying to become more efficient in the process? Yes. Well, how do you do that? Is it you redefine the process, you add some digital tools to the process? What is that? Once you understand that, then it becomes kind of easier to implement. We're not guaranteeing success here, but it's still, there's more clarity around the purpose.
Yeah, 100%. And when I parrot that 47% of time can be saved during pre-construction, we're actually like serious about that, right? So our clients will tell us, this is how long it's taken me to do X. This is how long it's taken me to do Y. And we will, through our customer success journey with them, articulate to them, it was taking you 2 hours. It's now taking you 1. This is what you're saving. This is what's happening. These are the little bits of edge that you're getting, right? And that you're taking back. Well, yeah, because you want to.
That's the promotion, right?
Exactly.
Why am I spending? There's an extra expense to this. There's an extra cost to me on this.
Yeah, there needs to be a metric for it, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things to wrap up into it.
Is there differences in the challenges between the smaller SMEs or the larger SMEs? That 100 people versus the 10 people teams. Is there big differences in their challenges, or is it similar problems?
It's similar problems. It's scale, really. Because whether it's a team of 10 or it's a team of 100, right? The bell curve kind of exists for people who are the early adopters and people who are the laggards, right? You just got a different sample. But so you're always going to have people who are like, oh, I don't want to do it, and people who are desperate to do it. What you just have to, it's change management, whether it's a team of 1, 10 or 100, and you have to change the culture, and you have to change the culture from a policy, right?
Is it top down then policy? Is it top down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you've got the product's got to work, and it's got to solve something meaningful for those guys. And so if I can only really articulate this for us, if I go back to that long and winding path, and there's 10 places where you lose all your data, and then you copy paste, and the tender addendum comes in, you copy paste again and again. You can articulate that quite easily it's painful thinking about it, right? I don't do it anymore, thankfully. But so if you can say this is what we're doing and why, this is the benefit, and this is how it's going to help, you have a good chance of success. You will still have the laggards because it's a bell curve for a reason.
And when we say double trouble SMEs and subcontractors, we're talking about the level of upskilling. If 95 or 7% of the industry is made up of SMEs, and we're digitizing the industry from a top-down approach, clients' requirements, main contractor GC requirements, then you have subcontractor supply chain requirements. We were having a conversation recently about the Fire Safety Act in the UK and the golden thread and the requirements now around full transparency and visibility. There seems to be a huge pressure on the SMEs now to upskill in right away, actually, is the reality of it, because it came into force last year, I believe, April 24, we're 1 year in it. Have you seen a shift in the industry recently when it comes to
the Building Safety Act?
The impact from that.
Yeah, there has been a big impact. Lots of our clients are rewriting contracts, and then when you're rewriting contracts, there's then, and this isn't me critiquing what's happened, but there's then tiers of bureaucracy which follow. And I think the reality is these things they're all good and well, right? And they need to happen. What happened at Grenfell is not to be repeated, right? I guess the real challenge we have as an industry is not doing those things. It's doing those things in the context of main contractor margins of 2%. Right? Because if main contractor margins are 2% and you're layering in more bureaucracy, That's going to have to be done by the quality manager, the employee, environmental manager, whoever does those things. There's a cost to it. And then the subbies do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just a big, it just feels to me like since I've been in the industry for 20 odd years now, you basically have seen a slow but steady chip on margin. And it might not be that a subcontractor's average margin of 15% has changed, but their cost has changed. It's just there's just a further burden. Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. There's creep. So the realities are that SMEs, subcontractors, the supply chain, even main contractors, right? Everyone is having to do these things and will do it. But unless we collectively say we're not doing it anymore, then we're not doing it anymore for that price, then we're in kind of, it's unsustainable in my view.
Yeah, so what we're going to see is there's going to be a cost impact on the industry because of the additional requirements around administration and control and all that. But is there opportunity then in the industry around inefficiencies, as you mentioned, that 35% on QSs? We just happen to be talking about QSs here. But if we talk about every other specialist discipline that's involved in the project lifecycle, if we're all operating at that inefficiency of 35%, imagine the value we can create within the industry in terms of cost, in terms of that margin piece.
Yeah, I can only talk to the QS piece given its relevance to me and my experience. But if there is, and I forget the exact number of QSs in the UK, but if there is a shortfall of 5 to 10,000 and there's 50,000 total, and that 50,000 is 35% inefficient, you haven't got a shortfall.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Like, so clearly there is, right? And QSs get paid a fortune. I'm sorry for saying this, QSs, but it's kind of true, right? You get paid more than a GP. So clearly there is. And my assessment would be that there is massive gains to be made through design, et cetera, et cetera. I know you focus very heavily on BIM and there's big efficiencies for QSs there as well, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of things that a QS does that fundamentally they should not be doing, in my opinion. Like, I just have always thought, largely because I was terrible at it, that measurement is a complete waste of time for a QS. Like, why is it not just done? Why do you not just get your quantities and crack on, right? And
right in the comments below, that's a serious one here. Quantity surveyors not doing quantities.
Quantities for QSs. We're scrapping it. I mean, I just don't see the need for that. I think it should be, you've got a project, you've got your design, you've got your bill, it's fixed, there's no errors in it. And then, because just on that, if you're talking inefficiency, just on that point alone, why is the architect and engineer, why are the design team doing X, right? And then giving it to the main contractor and saying, right, main contractor, do a bill for that. And then the main contractor's like, how quickly have I got? They go 3 weeks to return that tender.
Hurry up.
And then the main contractor goes, oh, do you know what? I'm not going to do that. Right, 20 subcontractors. Can you all do a bill, right? So one main contractor has 20 different bills. They piece it all together. The other main contractor, say there's 4, have another 20 different. So there's 80 different bills of efficiency just because there isn't a bill. So is there inefficiency in the industry? It's just absurd.
I think I agree. I agree with that point. The bill of quantities is something that should be brought back. It is coming back. It's coming back for 2 reasons. I think carbon is one. We now need to control carbon. We can't push the responsibility on the contractor because it sits with the client actually. And I do agree with you that quantity surveyors anymore shouldn't be doing quantities. I think they should be automated from the model. The design team generate the quantities. And when I say that, easy. When I say that, I mean that because they're drawing the geometries and putting in the information of that component, it's there. Then all we do as quantity surveyors is process. We just process information. We're not quantifying it anymore.
It's so. As a QS, I would have always been quite happy to not be doing quantities, right? Because that might sound ridiculous, but it wasn't. If I describe my style as a QS, I was kind of like a commercial, contractual QS, right? I wasn't a technical QS who was busy doing your takeoffs and whatever. But a QS, in my opinion, shouldn't be doing the takeoff, if I hadn't already read that clearly. They should be taking the takeoff and intelligently using that data to do procurement, to do value engineering, to do whatever. They shouldn't spend a week. They shouldn't lose a week and force their supply chain. If you're talking about creep again, getting a bit passionate about this.
Yeah,
But
no,
if you're talking about margin creep, that in the last 20 years since I've been in the industry, that BOQ point is margin creep that's come in. So previously you'd have the client that PQS, there's your bill, main contractor price it, subcontractor price it, bang. Now main contractor has to do the bill, that's a cost to them. Or as because their margins are tight, they've said, sorry, supply chain, you do it. So then the subbies are doing it, or they're not doing it, and they're saying, it's
something around.
It's 100 grand. Pop that in. Then the main contractor pops it in, wins it, and then they say, oh no, it's 120 grand
I got
now.
that wrong.
Yeah, now they all have an argument.
And let's get into the dispute and let's start the hard fight. We're seeing that, especially in the data center and the pharmaceutical industry, those mission critical, that seems to be the workflow around quantum, is push it down to supply chain. And it's more important, it's more evident actually. I thought it was more evident, certainly across Europe where we work more so out of the UK and Ireland, where you do have the PQS that manages that for the client. And our approach to that is, if you want to manage risk, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you should be producing the BOQ so that you understand that the design that has been produced by your design team is on the budget that you have set. The only way you can do that is quantum. The only way you can do quantum is on a unit price assembly level of detail. It can't be square meter price. It can't be benchmarking to a certain degree. The level of inaccuracy is much wider than if you're actually doing quantum.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I've heard a lot of...
And single point of control.
Yeah, exactly. And then if there's a change, so on and so forth. I've heard a lot of arguments as to why you shouldn't do that. And I've heard more of those arguments from a main contractor giving it to the subcontractor than from a client to a main contractor. But the argument generally is, I'm not doing the bill, because then I'll take responsibility for those 789 square meters. And if it turns out to be 795, it's my fault.
But it depends on your contractual relationship with the supply chain. You can transfer the responsibility of the quantities that you've measured to the supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. Fixed price, lump sum, job done.
Get them to check your work. Yeah. So the same for the client. Yes, measure them. We hear this the whole time in Denmark. No, we can't give quantities. Then we take responsibility. Oh, it depends on the contractual relationship. If it's remeasurable, yes, you do. If it's lump sum fixed price, transfer quantities, then it's their responsibility to verify the quantities if they're indicative.
I don't know whether that's just a poor excuse to cover up the realities of we don't want to do it because we don't have the resource and we don't have the budget for it. But it's a really weak excuse in my opinion.
I think it's a lack of understanding. I honestly think it's a lack of understanding of the contractual relationship between design material, bills of quantities and other contractual information.
But if you do the bill as well, not only do you have control in all those reasons that you argue, but also you then have the ability to do your analysis a lot more simply. You then have the ability to value all your variations and evaluations,
cash flow,
everything. Time. It's all standardized. So we don't have enough standardization in the QS process, in my opinion. We need more of it, and it should start from a project bill.
I agree, and I think carbon will be the catalyst to change all of that.
I certainly hope so.
It'll be very interesting to see how that develops over the coming years. But I think that it's super interesting. I think the SMEs and subcontractors they have a lot to do, unfortunately. And I know, I think everybody has a lot to do when it comes down to the digital transformation and the standardization and understanding process and the right tools. If you were to give advice then to any of the SMEs and subcontractor suppliers looking to, I guess, digitize or optimize is probably a better word to use, improve their margin, improve their the use of their people, what would that be?
I would say identify what you want to solve. In that, I gave you a very simple working example of digital contracts, right? There's a load of risk leaving the business. You'll do your annual review. You'll say, we lost a load of money on X, Y, and Z. How do we stop that margin creep? Let's try and find something to solve that digital contract solution. Be very specific. Go through the process. Do a proper procurement process. Go out to 2 or 3 providers, in the same way you would with your supply chain. Go through that process, and then actually challenge that provider on. How do you implement? How do you change the process? How am I going to ensure that the policy happens, as I've kind of touched on before? But then, like, wider point, with subcontractors and SMEs.
Yeah.
And I've worked for a family-run subcontractor, probably had 50, 60 staff, right? So I can put myself in that place. Yeah. You actually, as that organization, have a huge opportunity in the same way like tech companies do, because you're really nimble. Yeah. You can be really agile in a way that a tier one can't, right? Exactly. Tier one says, I've got to go through this huge bureaucratic procurement process. Yeah. It's going to take a year, and I've then got to roll it out over 400 QSs. Yeah. You can say, we've got a team of 8 QSs. Yeah. Let's get them in a room. Let's get them in the room. What are the challenges? What can we improve? Yeah. And then let's go out and do it, because there is no doubt we've uncovered a few here, right? In half an hour of talking, there will be things holding your QSs back. And if your QS had an extra day a week, that team of 8, they all had an extra day a week to go and make you money. Would you be happy? Yes. So unlock it, because it's there.
It's a very interesting point, actually. Ask your team, get them involved in the journey, in the transformation, because at the end of the day, they'll be the ones that are driving it. You can, of course, have as the leader, you can have the idea, you can set the scene, but give them the ownership of it. But I was thinking a little bit there on the SMEs and a contractor's QS, and something came to my mind about site visits. The amount of time that we spend going to site as QSs, it's invaluable, of course, to walk around the site to understand how things are built. But that monthly valuation site visit where QSs are driving 2 hours to get to site, they do the monthly valuation, they sit down with the subbies, they spend another 2 hours driving back, and I was going, surely we can automate that,
you see, sorry to cut over that.
No worries.
On that, I would be really uncomfortable, to be honest with you. I do not think you want to automate that.
Do you not? Yeah.
No, I really don't. If I'm going to give you a QS a day back per week, I'm going to give you the QS a day to go and do that. Yeah. Because at the moment, they might not go and do that, right? And my experience was that if you go and walk the site with your supply chain, with your client, you will only benefit from that. Yeah. And not doing that only causes problems, right? Because then you come back and you say, okay, well, they've knocked my valuation, which means I'm going to have to knock my sub-evaluations or whatever, right? Yeah. And then you haven't built up rapport. So I am personally not for automating for automating's sake. Yeah. And I still think that what makes a good QS is you've got all of your ducks in a row. And I'm saying get all of your ducks in a row much more efficiently, much more easily. Do it digitally. Yeah. But actually, the QS, and this is why I don't believe a QS as a role will go extinct. Yeah. The QS is there to manage risk, manage relationships up and down, and you just need more time to do that. And we've just, over time, and it goes back to that bureaucracy, that creep, is that QS has had more and more stuff put on their plate, which means that they can't go and do those things. So I would actually,
relationship is,
I think that's everything. Like, you're gonna have to at some point, which is why I wouldn't automate the valuation. Right? Maybe we're different on that, but I wouldn't automate it, because I'm going to go and do that 12 times. Yeah. So I'm going to spend 15, 18 hours with my counterpart over the course of the year, build a relationship with them, understand them, because I'm going to have to negotiate my variations, my claims, my subby claims, their claims, and I'm not going to be able to do that without a relationship. So you have to have that relationship.
So perhaps then if it is the only point of contact that you have with your opposite number on the client side or the subcontractor side, it becomes a very important part of your function as a QS. Yeah. I'll agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you should have multiple touch points with your counterparts through business at the end of the day. through the month. And I think I've just done a podcast where we've been talking about Irish guy actually who's an adjudicator talking about a reflection on the 25 adjudications that they did in the past in 2024, and the root cause of many of them being that there isn't that interrelationship is just being lost. And I think from my own experience, that is where the magic happens. Is you want your counterpart to be able to pick up the phone and call you, and you do them a favor, and vice versa. And that will never happen if you're not speaking to them or meeting them.
Yeah, it is a relationships based industry, and you're right, we're losing that a little bit, aren't we? I find it myself, sending the SMS or the email rather than picking up the phone and ringing. We kind of got into that comfort in our private lives as well as our personal, our business lives, if you like, and back in the olden day, it was the QS, the handshake and the walk to the site. It's very important.
I still think, like, we're sat in the room together now, right? It's a much better experience than if we weren't. And
as humans, we liked it. We need interaction.
I just think that a world-class QS in the future will be someone who has got all of the digital tools and is using them, but is still interacting with all of those key stakeholders. The
emotional side.
And managing those relationships.
If you were to give a bit of advice for upcoming QSs, what would you be saying that they should be focusing on if they're close to graduation or they've just graduated?
That is a really good question. I did an interview where I was getting interviewed by a youngish QS, and they were asking lots of questions like this. I think a lot of it is what we just talked about.
Yeah.
If you look at the people that you admire in your business or your past manager, there's always someone, right, that you look, that person was probably very good at building relationships, right?
Yeah.
And I think a good QS needs to be really good at sales, and that might sound ridiculous, but you need to sell the project to your subbies so that they give you the best price and they're interested and they're engaged. You need to sell your variations to your client. You need to sell all of these things, and you're only going to do that if you build a relationship. So I think you've got to be an amazing people person, and the managers above you that you think, oh, they had such a great impact on my career, or I really admire them. It's because they were great people. People persons. What you get, Mark, you know what I'm saying, right? But I just think the art of the relationship for particularly that next generation, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone, right? WhatsApp, text, blah, 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 is you need to build relationships, and eventually you need to have subcontractors who you can pick up the phone to, and they'll do what you ask them to do. Same with your suppliers, and you want
a bit of
people
give and
to do the
take
same.
and all of that.
Exactly. That's how it works.
Are we missing that in university? Then that softer skill educational piece. Like, not everybody has the natural ability to take conversations and be extroverted in that scene. So, are we missing that piece in education where we're of the value that piece has for QSs and the career development?
Possibly. I wouldn't necessarily. I don't know if I'm not right to comment on it, but what I would say is, I went out of school into work, but then did a day a week at university, right? But I was at a subcontractor. I was a trainee QS at a subcontractor, and I went to university.
If you like,
exactly. And university kind of almost meant nothing to me because it was all targeted at PQSs, a little bit at main contractors, a smidge at subcontractors. So it almost felt like I was just doing it. There's a lot of reasons to do it, right? Contract law and whatever, but really, like, practically speaking, was it giving me a huge amount? I don't think so. And maybe there is something in there wasn't that relationship flow. It's all theoretical, and then you actually get down to it, and it's quite a lot of it is down to relationships, I think.
But if we're focusing on the young graduates coming out of university, if I compare it to when I graduated from university, I didn't feel that the industry was in this evolution of change I have to go back now, in 2001. So
you don't look old enough, mate.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's a bit of a time ago. Some of our listeners weren't even born. Oh my God. But back then, I can remember coming into a very analog-based industry. We mentioned earlier on about posting out the tender packs with the drawings and specs and the pages, and this is all of that. But for young QS coming out now, like, we're in such a rapid kind of changing industry, the evolution of this digitization, sustainability focused industry. Like, what would your advice be to those young students coming out from a mindset kind of perspective?
From a mindset perspective, I would say you will probably arrive into a job and be handed some 1980s software, such as Excel or Word or whatever, right?
Or your desktop or your laptop and Excel just working.
I mean, for sure that will happen. And you'll probably think, can't things be automated? Can't things be better? And there are tools that will do that. I'm going to sound like an old fogey here, but I still think that the fundamentals of whether or not, like, tech is going to come and you're going to benefit from it. But the fundamentals of your role will still be like building that relationship, laboring the point, building the relationship up and down, getting trust, understanding what should actually be in a scope, right? And you'll probably only understand that really from time spent on site and understanding, the interface between the copy and the brickwork or whatever else, right? And seeing it, certainly for me, like I said, I wasn't particularly technical. And it helped me a lot. The visualization of, okay, that's there's the detail, that's the drawing. That's actually what it looks like. Okay. And you can then, and I reflect on the period of time in maybe the first year I spent as a training QS was probably 90% in the office. And then the next 2-3 years, I probably spent 60% out on site, right? So, and that accelerated my understanding dramatically. So I would say tech is going to come. You'll probably be frustrated to start with, but go out and understand the basics and the principles, right? Because if you understand the basics and the principles, tech will help you to fast track it all, right? But without that, tech is only as good as the person using it, right?
That's it, yeah. And I always had this idea in my mind that young graduates coming out should be challenging everything. Why are we doing it this way? Why are these the systems we're using? Have these changed in the last number of years? Is this the standards actually that the industry is most familiar with? Why aren't we using those standards? I think being inquisitive about absolutely everything you touch is super valuable, because if you pick the right company and you get the right kind of manager and leader, then they'll appreciate that ability to challenge.
We've started doing like a question time on Own the Build, where we'll have people send in questions, and often like young QSs, right? And one of them was, as a commercial manager, as a manager or a commercial director, what would you be looking for in a young QS, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head there, like being inquisitive. We described it as like curiosity, right? And it's kind of saying, birdcage scaffold. What is a birdcage scaffold? Right? Can you tell me, right? And being curious, asking questions, and for what is going to get you the most growth, right? You see a lot of young QSs, or in my experience, you would have young QS come up to you and say, "This has happened. What do I do?" And I would always say, "You tell me. Go away and give me 2 options of what you'd do, and be curious, work it out, and then come back and present those 2 options, and I'll help you say option 1 is the best, but change it and do this." Then you're going to learn. So be curious and just kind of jump in. It's an amazing industry, construction, right?
I like that point actually. We use it quite a lot, is just go get things done. If someone is asking for anybody to give them a hand, a senior, you just go, you know what, I'll do it. I'll give you a hand. I might not know what it is that I need to do, but I'm really curious to learn. And what you'll end up noticing as a young QS is that people start coming to you, go, "Can you help me with this? Can you help me with this?" Because they know that you're hungry for it, if you like. It's
like getting your reps in, isn't it? The more you do of it, the better you get. So just put your hand up and say, "I want to do as much as possible."
Excellent. Paul, it's been a pleasure having you on, buddy. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, mate. Likewise.
Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.